And that's our cue to begin. Welcome, everybody. This is the Do Tell Story Swap, originally in Rohnert Park, California, but now we are all over the place. We have people joining us from the state of Washington and the state of New York. Welcome, welcome. And my name is Brandon. I am the host for this evening. I've been coming to the swap for a little over 5 years or so. And we have our two chairs here, Katie Mangan and Meg Brown. I see that Vina has just come into the waiting room. Genevieve is joining us, so that's great. We have more people coming in. I want to highlight the fact that tonight we will be telling 5 to 7 minute stories. And Meg, one of the chairs of the Do Tell Swap, will be timing, and she will let you know when you've reached the 7-minute mark. This is something that we want to work on because making your story shorter, if need be, really crafting it, that's part of the art that we want to work on together. So we're encouraging people to be very conscious of and conscientious of their time and how long they are telling. So generally what will happen, we'll hear maybe 5 or 6 stories, and then we have a break in the middle, 5-minute break, and you can get a hot cup of tea or whatever your beverage of choice is. Use the restroom. I don't need to tell you where it is. I make that joke every month. And of course, we'll come back and we like to introduce ourselves. So there will be a moment to say where you're from, and there's always a monthly prompt. And it's we've got a good one for tonight. And I promise it's not a Valentine's Day prompt. So we're not going to be limited to a love story. And then there'll be time for announcements and then another round of stories. So let's get going. I am so honored to welcome to the Do Tell stage all the way from New York. And this is by way of Ed Lewis. Ed is, he's been coming just about every month. I don't see him tonight, but sounds like a friend of Ed Lewis. Please welcome to the Do Tell stage, Bev Schwartz.
Oh, thank you. I live in Albany, New York, and that's upstate. So that's where we get all the heavy snow. The name of my story is Charlie Tuna's Hiccups, of which I'm planning on publishing. I'm in the process of doing that. So, oh, excuse me. I was teaching 3rd grade that morning in a lesson, and all of a sudden, I heard a hiccup. Where did it come from? I looked around, everyone was looking around, and all of a sudden, everyone, including me, started looking at Charlie Tuna. Now, that's a weird name to have for a 3rd grader, but everyone called him Charlie Tuna because in those days, we didn't have free lunch and free breakfast, and we had our lunch in the classroom, including me. We'd all sit and eat every day together. And every day he'd take out a brown bag and he'd pull out some tuna sandwiches and an apple or two and put it on his desk. Then he'd pull out another brown bag and took out this time a couple more apples and tuna fish. And he'd look all around the room, and then he'd quietly get up and take some of the sandwiches and apples and go up and say, "Would you like a sandwich? I see you forgot your lunch today." And most of it, they would nod and smile. "Oh, thank you, Charlie." And they then started Charlie Tuna because every sandwich was always tuna fish. And then he'd sit down and eat his lunch. So no child went hungry because his mother packed extra sandwiches for those who might not have had any food in the house, because we were an inner city school. When Charlie Tuna, and one little girl said, "Put your head between your legs and hold your breath." And he did. and he couldn't hold it and he hiccuped. One little boy said, hold your hands above your head, hold your mouth. And he hiccuped. Then one little girl said, Charlie, I think you should go to the nurse. I bet she knows how to get rid of hiccups. So it was an old school, 1920 it was built. It was old wooden floors and went kaplop, kaplop, and the wooden floors would creak and crack. And he opened the old wooden door with the glass in it. And as he closed it, it shattered like it usually did, but never broke. And off he went. Well, Charlie Tuna went up to the nurse, and there was about 5, 6 kids in front of him with lined up with chairs. They were all sitting there, but the nurse always came out and wanted to know if there was a real emergency. Charlie, why are you here? I had the hiccups and I interrupted the whole class and a lesson. Okay. Well, I'll be with you when it's your turn. But meanwhile, here's a piece of bubble gum. You know, spearmint mint. You'll like it. I thought you might like that while you're waiting. So he took the gum and unwrapped it, popped it into his mouth, and he sat there talking to the kids with his hiccups. Well, when it was Charlie's turn, the nurse said, come on in, Charlie. I want to see what happened to you. And he says, why are you here? Well, I had the hiccups. Good, it worked. He goes, what worked? And she picks up a garbage can and she said, spit out your gum into the garbage can. Here's a Kleenex to wrap it in. And he does it. And he goes, oh, I was wondering why you gave me that gum, because I know gum's not allowed in school. Well, Charlie, did you know that when you have the hiccups, if you start chewing on gum or something, it stops the hiccups? Oh, but gum's not allowed in school. I know. So you take a piece of paper the next time, put it in your mouth and chew it, and it's going to stop and you won't have to interrupt the class. Oh, said Charlie, I understand. So he went down, and by then the kids and I had asked him to get their little rugs, and I had read them a story, and we were going to have show and tell then afterwards. And he goes quietly, he opens the door, and you could have heard a pin drop because everyone was looking at Charlie Tuna to see if he still had the hiccups. Well, he walked in, he got his rug, and he sat down with us. And then one of the little girls says, Charlie, how did you get rid of your hiccups? And then he told the story about the gum and how gum gets rid of hiccups. Oh, said the kids. Interesting. Well, the next day, we did our work in the morning and it was lunchtime. And Charlie Tuna, as usual, took out his first brown bag, took out his tuna fish sandwiches and an apple or two. And then he took out his other bag and took out the extra tuna fish sandwiches and looked around the room and went up to those kids who didn't have a lunch and gave them tuna fish sandwiches. But this day was different. He took out another bag, a third bag, and he raised his hand. I'm going, oh my God, now what? Miss Schwartz, can I talk to you in the class? I said, oh, of course, Charlie. Well, I told my mother the story about the gum, and she said she didn't want me putting a piece of paper in my mouth and chewing it. That could be dirty. You can catch things like a cold with it, she said. Okay. Well, in this bag that I have next to me, he said, my mother bought some packs of gum. And I want to give this to the class. So if anybody in the future ever gets hiccups, we have a piece of gum to offer them. Can we do that? And everyone said, oh, and I'm thinking, now everyone's going to get the hiccups. Well, Charlie, you know, gum's not allowed in school. And the kids go, oh, please, please. And I said, well, I had a drawer, the third drawer down in my old wooden desk that was real deep. And when I saw kids playing with things that they couldn't, I had a June box. And a June box is everything you collect during the year. And the last day of school, you get it back and not before. I said, I could put this gum with my June box in the last drawer. So it's hidden. And if you can keep a secret, this is third graders, of not telling anyone, we have gum in our classroom. If someone really has the hiccups, I will give them the gum. And when the hiccups go away, they have to throw it in the garbage in front of me. But shh, it's our class secret. And the rest of the year, we didn't have any hiccups. However, everyone knew where the gum was. And when I retired, I left a note to the next teacher, leaving the gum there, telling her how to use the gum for hiccups. And that's the story of Charlie Tuna hiccups. And it's a true story.
Wow. Thank you so much, Bev, and welcome to our Do Tell Swap. I certainly hope you are a regular contributor. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
I love your June box. That's what is the strangest thing that ended up in your June box?
Well, this little boy, I knew his mother, and she was my room mother, and her little boy Jimmy always played with Marine soldiers, and he'd line them all up in his desk. So by the end of the year, I had the whole platoon in my desk. So so he grew up and he went into the Marines, and he was in the Gulf War. And we were corresponding with him. He made a video of the ship. All the people from all over the US, the Marines, were talking to us and stuff. And he came in all dressed up, and he asked me, do you still have the June box? Could you make sure I got all my little soldiers back? Yeah. So, and that's another true story. I'll tell about something about him, but that's, everyone always remembered that story. And after that, every year I told my class the story about Charlie Tuna's hiccups, so I was known for that, so.
Charlie Tuna, such an epic.
And he was a chubby little boy too,
Oh,
he was like.
He could be in a movie, I think, too.
Well, let's hope my book gets published, and then we'll go to the movie.
Right.
I've already had an NBC special on me for Things That Work with Jane Pauley, introduced it on Tom Brokaw, and well, I'll give it away now. I might as well. I'm the one who started STEM in 1985 and coined the word STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math.
Wow.
And I won some national awards for it too.
Oh, that's.
I have a nice story.
Lucky to have you.
Yeah, I have a nice story about that too.
We have a STEM department at my school.
Well, now you can say, no, we were the first one to have our 501c3. We became a formal organization, non-for-profit in New York State. And, I coined the word STEM.
That's great. Well, what an honor to meet you. Thank you, Bev. Thank you. All right. And following Bev, I think you know each other. Isn't that right? Vicki, do you know Bev? I think you do. But please welcome to the Do Tell stage, Vicki Ness.
I need to unmute myself, sorry.
You're fine.
And unmute myself. Here we go. Bev, I just want to say your love of kids shows through in every one of your stories. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Anyway. So Willard was a big boss, and he was mean, I tell you, he was mean. He had a plaque on his door that said, "I don't get headaches, I give them." And every week, his underlings, his directors, his administrative assistants would come in one at a time and sit in front of his big, expansive desk and roll out all the numbers and all the production issues and all the delivery issues. And they'd wait, and he might stab at the air and grunt. But he was a mean boss. and they'd just get up and they'd leave. Well, one day, little tiny hollow spun sugar bricks showed up on his desk, lined up. And every day they got taller and taller until there was a wall of beautiful, glistening, hollow spun sugar bricks. And it got to where the people who came into the office and sat themselves down could barely even see him. And so they talked to the wall. And they'd talk about their numbers, and they'd talk about what was happening in the production line, and try to look over it. And every so often, Willard would grace them, and he would rise above the wall like a pale sun on an Arctic landscape and sink back down. Well, after a while, the wall got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it turned into a fortress, and there were turrets with capped roofs and spun sugar dragons spinning around in the air conditioning, and there were little icing ivy and colored flowers crawling up the wall, and there was only one teeny tiny window, and through that window the desk lamp shone light, but that's all they could see. So they would sit down and they would go through their numbers, and they would go through their production issues, and they would sometimes hear a grunt and sometimes just hear tick, 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 tick of somebody pounding away on their computer. And eventually they heard nothing, 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 nothing. And so the more creative of them took to answering for him. So, okay, sir. So we had a 58% increase of production last week. Oh, that's a really good idea, Jim. You did good. Thank you, sir. Nothing. Silence. Nothing. And one by one, they would close up their folders and grab their papers and their pens and their phones and slink out of the office. Week after week of silence. Then all of a sudden a postcard came addressed to the entire company, and it said, "Finally, I know what it's like to be the richest man in the world." And on the front was this beautiful beach with 2 beach chairs and an umbrella and blue water and a sun rising. And so it wound up in the cafeteria bulletin board, and eventually to HR, who thought something was fishy here. And they took it to the COO and the CFO and the CEO, and they all stormed the castle. And they went into his office, and they went behind the facade, and there was nothing there. The desk was empty. There was a coffee mug that had grown mold. There was a sandwich that had gotten so old that the ends were picked up like pagoda leaves. And nothing, dust. So they got into his computer, and they went through all his files. And then they went through everything on his desktop, and then they dove into his email. And there was, very suspicious, there were emails from H. Knight, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So they dove into that to find out where he got all his wealth from all of a sudden. And they found it. Yes, they did. They went through every single email and they found it. And it wasn't extortion. And it wasn't embezzlement or fraud. It wasn't even some flimsy Ponzi scheme. What he had in his email were hundreds and hundreds of love letters. And then they reread the postcard, and it didn't say, "Finally, I know what it is to be the richest man on earth." What it said was, "Finally, I know what it is to be the richest man on earth." Happy Valentine's Day.
That was nice, Vicky, and it was about
Yeah.
5 minutes, 27 seconds.
And
And I have
then
to apologize to Bev. I was so interested in hearing what she was saying. I didn't time you, so you got a free pass this time. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just info.
oh, that's great. Vicky, that you turned that story on a dime at the end. That's so wonderful. I love when tellers are able to do that. A pale sun rising on an Arctic landscape. That was really, really wonderful.
If you've ever had a boss like that, yeah.
Yeah. I always look forward to hearing your stories. Thank you, Vicki. And let's see, I'm looking for Evelyn. She is right here.
Yep.
And she is, when we are in person, of course, Evelyn is our host in Rohnert Park, but we're still virtual.
Right.
But please welcome to our virtual stage, Evelyn.
Okay. Hi. So I'm in high school. It's 1974. And my new best friend, Debbie Asago, has invited me over to her house. So we pull into the driveway and she goes, "Oh no, my father's home." Well, we go in. I don't remember what the segue was, but the next memory I have is I'm sitting next to Mr. Asago and he's got a scrapbook on his lap. Debbie's across the room and she is looking mortified because this isn't just any family scrapbook. This is the scrapbook of his family's internment at the Japanese internment camp in Manzanar, California during World War II. And there I was, it's 1974. I knew all about Anne Frank and what the Germans had done in World War II in the German concentration camps. But I had no idea that we had had our own camps here. I must have said something like that. And that's why I was awarded sitting next to Mr. Asago and seeing his scrapbook. So he turned the pages, it was a combination of actual photographs as well as newspaper articles. And even though Debbie was embarrassed, I was actually fascinated. I had no idea about this part of American history. For some reason, when they talked about World War II, they left this little part of it out. I was amazed to learn that we had done this to people. And I was also quite amazed to learn that here Mr. Asago and his family had been well on their way to realizing the American dream. And suddenly they were rounded up, had everything taken away and put into this camp. I thought instead of feeling bad or bored or whatever Debbie was afraid I was feeling, I was like impressed. I'm sitting next to a real live Anne Frank. So there have been many times that, I've met the friend, used to meet the parents of friends of mine. But of all the interactions I ever had with any parent of any friend, that was the most memorable. And one of the things that stands out the most is how it changed, how I felt Mr. Asago's bitterness when he first was opening the scrapbook. But the longer he sat there with me and I listened and I was interested, the more I felt that bitterness drop away. And he was just an elder with a story to tell, someone interested who wanted to learn. And one of the things that really, why that memory is also so powerful is here I thought that kind of thing was only something somehow German people did. And what I learned that day is anytime we see someone not as who they are, but whatever label we give them, we lose. And that's my story for tonight.
Oh,
Well,
Evelyn,
Evelyn, I
thank
want to
you.
let you know that was almost 4 minutes, and it was a really wonderful 4 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Mr. Asago, is that right?
Yeah.
That was probably very healing for him to be able to tell you stories about it. It's important that those stories are told for many reasons. You were educated,
Right.
and it may have helped him work through some of the trauma. What a beautiful story, Evelyn.
Right. And little did Debbie know, I loved family stories.
Yeah,
I wasn't bored at all.
you're a
And
storyteller.
there, I know that's a storyteller. That's how you knew. How many
Yeah.
people I have that to me, that's a happy memory. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you, Evelyn. Let's see. Oh, goody. Lori, where are you? It's always a treat to hear from Lori, and she always has a story. Please welcome Lori to the, oh, there's a delay right now. Anyway, welcome Lori to the Do Tell stage.
This story is called Ambassador of Hugs. My grandpa was really special to us. He made every holiday fun, and Valentine's Day was no exception. He would build a beautiful Valentine box out of a cardboard box, maybe a shoe box, with construction paper and lace doilies and pink and red, and put a big slot on the top. And all of us, not just the kids, everybody in the family would make homemade Valentines. And we'd get so excited to make them in secret and then put them in the box. And then the day of, we'd open it up and everybody would spread the love. It was great fun. So I've always liked Valentine's Day. I actually wrote a poem, Here Comes the Hearts, in 6th grade. And I also happen to like dressing up for Halloween. So my guy and I were invited to a party, and the general rule was everybody had to come with something original and made up, nothing like you buy a costume or a mask at the store. So around September, October, I start looking for ideas, and usually that's how my costumes came up. I would find an interesting prop or a dress. One year I went as Twiggy because I found this perfect, ugly 1960s dress, and it was a mini skirt. And at the time I was very slender, so it was a lot of fun just to play with the idea. So I didn't have anything in mind yet, but I knew it had to be creative. So I went to this big rummage sale in October, and I found a red dress that kind of stood out to me. And I'm not a person who usually wears red, but it was tart red. And it was long and sleeveless and lacy at the bottom. It was like knee length, and it was just kind of silky, fancy, pretty. Maybe some people wore it as a petticoat, who knows? And then I also found a white shirt that went over it that had like white eyelet lace. And they were near each other. And I thought, you know, that looks just like a Valentine. And I got kind of excited. Oh, maybe I can make something of it. So I take these things home for all of $1.50 or something. And then I think, now, how do you become a human Valentine? So I thought about it. And I had a couple weeks before the party. And so I went to the Legacy, which is a thrift store with crafts and fabrics. And I don't sew, but I got really fortunate that I found in one of the baskets, somebody had already cut out this beautiful little fabric hearts in all different colors of pink and red and white. I thought, perfect. So I purchased those. And then I went home and I tried to attach them. And like I said, I'm not a person who sews. So I'm trying to get them on this silky fabric, and they just kept kind of puckering. They kind of look like heart attacks. I thought, oh, that won't work. So then I tried double stick tape, and they'd fall off. So, you know, how much time did I want to spend on this thing? So I finally just stapled the hearts onto the dress, and that worked. In the meantime, I asked him, you know, hey, are you putting any thought into this party? It's coming up in a couple weeks. Nah, I'm busy. I'll think of something later. Okay, fine. It's up to him. So I'm working on it. I'm thinking, what else can I do? So I found like pink and white hearts and some socks and some gloves. And I just kept adding on to things to make myself look like a Valentine, I hoped. And across the front of my chest, I wrote, "Be mine" in big letters and a heart. And I even found a pillow that was heart-shaped at the thrift store. And I used some of the leftover little hearts to adorn it. And I attached that to the back of the dress. So I've got this thing like full of hearts and having a lot of fun with it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go try this out. At the Occidental Farmers Market, they always had the last Friday in October would be their Halloween theme. So I thought, perfect, I'll go do that before the party. So I was really excited to try this out. And I went around and people looked at me and they kind of nodded and they didn't really say much. And I said, well, what do you think I am? Can you guess? And nobody really knew. I'm like, what? You know, and I realized that people who are like younger than 30, they don't know what "be mine" means. They don't see the chalk hearts, or they just, maybe it's just too old fashioned. I don't know. I mean, it was really obvious to me what I was. But the worst insult was that a couple people, when I kind of asked them to guess, they said, Raggedy Ann. I'm like, oh, Raggedy Ann, I don't have red hair or orange yarn hair. I'm not a doll all stuffed. You know, it's like, that was right. That was really insulted. So I went back home, went back to the drawing board, found a few more props, found that pillow. And so I felt like I was as ready as I was going to be. I found I had longer hair than I put ponytails with red ribbons. I mean, I just did everything I could to decorate myself. So in the meantime, it's the day of the party, and I've put like 20 hours into this darn costume, and I'm really excited to go, but I'm really also sure hoping they'll get it. In the meantime, I asked him what, you know, we've got to leave in 2 hours. Oh, he wanders around the house in his workshop and he gathers all this stuff up. And I'm like, what is this? And it was like an orange safety cone that he put a light inside of, and a big canvas jacket with a weird emblem on it, and a ski mask that covered everything up, you know, except his eyes. And he puts it all together and I'm like, what are you supposed to be? He goes, well, I think I'm a rocket man. And so on the drive there, he tries to figure out more of what he is. He still doesn't really know. He gets to the party, and this is Mr. Taciturn. He doesn't really pay attention to details or timing, you know, as you can see. He spent 20 minutes on this thing. He gets to the party and he comes to life, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm Mr. Rocket Man from the planet Exxon, and here's my green light, you know, it's like a light stick. Here's my lightsaber for energy. And he was like the life of the party, and everybody was getting such a kick out of him. In the meantime, I'm going around, hello, you know, and I'm like offering hugs, like hint, hint, you know, and people are still like, huh, what, you know, like really puzzled. And granted, the younger people, again, nobody really seemed to get it, but the older people did eventually figure it out. So I was pleased. And, you know, I had a lot of fun. I gave out hugs, I spread the love, and I put my heart into it. And at the end of the night, when they gave out the costume awards, did I win a prize? No, he did. And I have a picture here that I set down. Let's see, can you see it? Let me see, I gotta figure out the view so I can get it.
If you hold it farther back, hold it up against your chest. There you go.
So there I am with pink and red and white, and he's this weird creature from outer space. And he's the one that won the prize. But I'm sticking with it. I'm still an ambassador of love no matter what costume I wear. There you go.
You came in second.
Oh, Lori, that was so much fun. You went up, you are about 7 minutes, 29 seconds. But it was worth it.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
It was very worth it.
And what's behind me? I have a mug with all those hearts on it. So I just took a picture of it and put in the background for the ambience.
Oh, Lori, it's just fun to experience the seasons with you. Thank you for that. Raggedy Ann, really?
I know.
That I wouldn't have guessed that. And I love those chalk hearts. We used to have those too.
Mhm.
Okay.
The echo, is everybody getting the echo?
No.
I am.
I think it's because Meg and Mary are near each other and they both have their sound on, I think.
Do you think it's because of us? Because I'm not getting it now. I was just only getting it with Lori.
Hmm.
So, are you getting it now?
No.
Okay. Well, it's fine because her story didn't echo, so I think we're good.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that was strange. Anyway, wonderful story, Lori. Thank you so much. And we're always in for a treat when Sharon throws her name in the hat. And she has done so. From Washington, the state, Sharon Elwell.
Clyde was as grumpy as they come. He lived alone and he liked it like that. He didn't like animals. He had no use for people. And he had some serious issues with God. He mumbled and he muttered and he griped and he complained pretty much all day long. Now, Clyde's yard was a miracle of good order. There was never a branch or a leaf or a rock out of place. And the general messiness of the rest of the universe made him extremely unhappy. And sometimes when he was working out in the yard, his arguments with the Supreme Being would become vocal. And he would say quite a lot about the way things were being mismanaged. His neighbor, Margaret, who was pretty much his polar opposite, she was a sunny little person, gave him the nickname of Parson because she felt that his diatribe sounded a lot like a sermon to her, only sort of a reverse sermon, because there was never any love or hope or encouragement in anything that he said. Normally, he would not have put up with a person who was so joyful, but he needed her. Every few weeks, he liked to go out of his castle of solitude and head up into the mountains to go fishing for more solitude. And Margaret was the one who trimmed his plants and watered them and picked up his mail. And so he endured her enthusiastic sentiments. But one day while he was out working in the yard, he got a voicemail from her. It turned out that Margaret had had a 911 experience and she was in the hospital recovering from an emergency appendectomy. Would Clyde please go to her house, put out some food and water for the dog, and pick up a few items? Now, he would have loved to say no, but he was talking to a machine, so he couldn't think of what to do. So he stomped across his yard and into her yard, found the key under the fake rock in the flower bed, and went into the house. It was not hard to find the stuff for the dog, but when he got to the bedroom door, it made him shiver. The last thing he wanted was to go rummaging through the personal items of another human being. And he really had to force himself before he made his way to the bureau and opened it up and got the requested items, and then same with the bathroom, and away he went. Now his plan was to arrive at the hospital just as the voice over the loudspeaker said, "Visiting hours are now over," so that he could drop the bundle on the overbed table, give Margaret a wave, and be gone, and no conversation would be required. So up to the last minute, the plan worked perfectly. And as he dumped off the items on the bed table, he turned and she said, "Thanks so much, Parson." And a tiny voice from the other side of the curtain in the divided hospital room said, "Parson?" Did she say parson? Well, he was going to take a step back and stick his head around the window to explain the misunderstanding. But when he looked in the bed, there was a tiny woman being swallowed up by the huge bed, and she was in obvious distress. There were dark circles under her eyes and tears on her cheeks, and she said, "I am so glad that you came. I called for the hospital chaplain, but she's gone home for the night, and I don't want to call her back. I'm not sure I can make it through until morning. Can you give me a blessing, Father?" And Clyde said, I'm not a father. I'm not a priest. And she said, "I don't care what denomination you are. As a man of the cloth, you surely understand that God loves all of his children." "Well, it's not, what is it?" And he said, "I'm not." "Please," she said, "I'm sure anyone that has enough faith can give me a blessing." And Clyde said, "That's just it. I don't have any faith." And on the other side of the curtain, Margaret heard that and she called out, "You have plenty of faith. You talk to God every day." He couldn't think of an answer to that. And the little woman held out her hand. And so he took it and he said, "What is it that you wanted me to do?" She said, "Well, I want you to give me a blessing." "All right." "Bless you, my child." No, not like that. You can't give me the blessing. You have to ask God to give me a blessing. So you have to address deity in this blessing. Try it again. And so he said, "Dear God." She said, "No, that's even worse. It sounds like you're swearing." And then he remembered. And so he began, "Our Father who art in heaven." And she said, "That's much better. You're doing very well. Please bless," oh, I don't know your name. Bessie Allen. "Please bless Bessie Allen. Please let her feel the peace and the comfort that she needs to get through this night. Please bless her to know that she's not alone, that you are with her and that you love her." When he opened his eyes, the little woman had relaxed. The tears were gone. The smile had come back, and she said, "Oh, thank you so much, Parson. You've done it. I know I'll be able to sleep now." And she let go of his hand. From the other side of the curtain, Margaret listened really hard for what he was going to say next. But for the first time in many years of conversation with the Supreme Being, Clyde had nothing more to say.
Oh, Sharon. Now, how did you create this story? Do you know these people, or did you create it out of your imagination, or were you inspired by people you know, or?
It's been a while since I worked on that story, and I honestly don't know where I got it. I don't know where it came from. And the reason I put it aside for so long was because I didn't have an ending. And then I realized it really doesn't need an ending, you know.
Well, you do have an ending. That was beautiful. I love
Very, very nice, Sharon. Really liked that one too. Very special, actually. And that was 7 minutes, 50 seconds.
Oh, so I did go over. Okay.
Oh, well, no problem. Just this is FYI for you guys.
Thank you.
Purely in the interest of awareness, I guess. I love the the concept of the reverse sermon. I imagine he was swearing a little bit while he was doing his work and leaving his kingdom of solitude for fishing, where he found further solitude. That was great. Okay, Sharon, it's always a gift to have a story from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have, I think we have time for a Katie Mangan, a dose of Katie Mangan. What do you think, Katie? Would you like to go now?
Sure, yes.
Good.
I think it might be a little over 7 minutes.
Oh, well, that's perfect. And with you, 7 minutes feels like one.
I hope it does this time too. Okay. The storm had blown out during the night and leaving a fresh layer of snow. It was in the winter time. Eduardo and his twin brother Tomas were so excited, and they raced out of the front door before their mother could say, "Wait for your sisters." They were going to go to the woods, the deep woods, that mysterious and magical forest that they lived beside. Now, before they got to the woods, they saw a group of boys making their way in the same direction. And Tomas said, "Let's catch up with them." But Eduardo hung back and said, No, Tomas, I don't trust them." But Tomas took no notice and he ran on ahead. And so Eduardo reluctantly followed him. Well, first they went to the tree fort that the boys had been making to see if it had been damaged by the storm. Then there was an epic snowball fight. And after that, the boys decided to move further into the forest, into the trees. One boy suggested that maybe they have a game of hide and seek. Another boy sensed that Eduardo really didn't want to play, and he said, "Eduardo, you will be the seeker." And as the boys began to run off, they shouted, "Don't forget to count to 50 and slowly." Eduardo did not want to be left alone, and he called out after them angrily, "Remember the golden rule." Now, the golden rule was you never, ever left anyone alone in the forest, and certainly not in the wintertime. And to the credit, the boys did stop, and they all huddled together in a group. And one of the elder boys said, "Let's trick Eduardo. We will stay together as a group. We'll run as fast as we can. We'll go to the village. He'll be fine. He can follow our tracks." So Eduardo watched them race off, and he began to count slowly. And he got to the low 40s when he heard a noise that truly terrified him. Coming through the forest towards him was this strong wind. He could hear it crashing through the branches. And he knew that the snow and the ice that had been forming throughout the winter, he knew that that would be shaken loose and it will fall to the ground. And when it did, it landed with a thud. And if it hit you, it was very painful. So Eduardo sheltered himself as best he could and just waited for the wind to eventually pass over him. After it had gone, he got up and dusted himself off. He was bruised and sore. And he looked around. And the ground was littered with the old snow and the ice and the broken branches. and all the tracks had been obliterated. He thought he should look and really consider making himself a shelter and to stay there until he could be rescued. And as he looked around on a small rise, there stood the most magnificent wolf he had ever seen. And this wolf was staring at him. It had a beautiful gray silver coat covered with snow and little pieces of ice. And when the sun's rays caught it, it just like shone like gold and diamonds. Eduardo was so relieved when that wolf decided to turn and walk away. But then it stopped and looked back at him as if to say, "Follow me." Well, Eduardo felt he had nothing to lose, so he began to follow the wolf at what he hoped was a safe distance. And as they traveled through the snow, Eduardo was delighted to see that the wolf left no tracks in the snow. Now the boys had made good progress, and they had actually not been in the path of the wind. And now they were nearly ready to go out of the woods and into the village. But a huge argument began, and Tomas was so angry. "We must go back and look for Eduardo." Oh, the argument went back and forth until one boy looked and pointed and said, a ghost. And coming out of the trees towards them, this white figure, covered in white. And it began to move towards them very slowly. But as it got closer, they realized it wasn't a ghost, it was Eduardo. They were so pleased and delighted to see him. They raced over to him. "Were you in the path of the wind? Did you get clobbered with the ice and the snow? How did you find your way to us?" Eduardo smiled. "The wolf led me here." None of the boys believed him. "The spirit wolf," he added. That made them uneasy, all except Tomas, who went over to Eduardo, put his arm around him. "Brother, let's go home. Blessings, abundance, and healing to you all."
Hey, Katie, you were just spot on 7 minutes. Beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it did feel like 1 minute. You really weave a spell over us, Katie. I really enjoy hearing about Eduardo's background because he's so wise and full of magic in his later years. In case you didn't know this, Katie tells stories with Eduardo from time to time, actually quite often. He's her character. And so I love hearing about his development and how he came to be the man he is. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
I think it's time for a break. We'll take a 5-minute break. You can heat up some tea or open a bottle of wine or whatever you would like to do on a Tuesday night. And of course, when we come back, we'll have our virtual circle where we introduce ourselves and we answer a quick prompt. And I already mentioned it's not a Valentine's Day prompt. And we'll have some announcements. And then I know that Genevieve has thrown her name into the hat. And if anybody else is interested, we do probably have quite a bit of time for a story. So let Katie know. She's in charge of the list. And let's take a 5-minute break. If you are not going to leave your computer, I recommend that you put it on gallery view and you can socialize. Just unmute yourself and start talking to whoever else is unmuted. This is kind of a chance to virtually mill around a little bit, but I will stop the recording or pause it anyway. And please make sure I do remember to turn it back on when we resume in 5 minutes. So right around 8:05 or so. It's almost 8 o'clock now. All right, everybody, see you soon.
Right. Are you going to stay with us?
I hope I haven't talked too much tonight. I'm sorry. I can talk to a real human being. I live by myself with 3 cats, so it's nice to talk to adults. You know,
You're among storytellers.
thank you. Oh, I have a joke for the evening. You ready?
Yeah.
What sits on the bottom of the ocean and quivers? That means to shake.
Hmm.
A nervous wreck. That was me tonight.
Oh,
When I go to a new group, I get a little nervous.
oh, so much to be confident about, though.
Yeah.
Welcome back. I remembered to turn the recording on.
Oh, no.
Good. And your joke is on there forever.
Oh,
Great
no.
joke.
You want another one then? A quick one? What did one strawberry say to the other strawberry? If you weren't so fresh, we wouldn't be in this jam.
Oh my gosh.
They're 3rd grade jokes.
I'm going to use it in the 9th grade. How's that?
Go for it. Hey, we're having an exam today. Here's the joke. And they're all nervous wrecks. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
What grade do you teach?
9
What subject?
and 12. Humanities, history, mostly. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
Welcome back, everybody. And this will be our virtual circle where we get to introduce ourselves. And Katie will help me make sure that I get to everybody because the order in the participants sometimes jumps around a little bit. So forgive me if I do skip you. It wasn't intentional. I'll begin and I'm going to share this month's prompt. And the prompt is, what puts spring in your step? So it could be Valentine's Day related. But for me, it's not. My name is Brandon Spars. I am a high school teacher here in Santa Rosa. And what puts spring in my step is the steelhead run in the Russian River. It's funny because Sharon told the story about going out to a river for peace and tranquility. Well, the Russian River doesn't really give you that. It's pretty crowded and there's people jockeying for space to get at these beautiful fish, but I still enjoy my time out there. It certainly puts spring in my step, especially knowing when I'm about to go out fishing. I get pretty excited. So I'm going to pass it over to our coordinator, Katie Mangan.
Oh dear. Hi, I'm Katie Mangan. I come from Santa Rosa. What puts a spring in my step? I think it would be the thought that, you know, sometimes we'd have a late winter storm when spring has begun. That puts a spring in my step because I love winter. And yeah.
Very good.
It's weird.
I could use, yeah, I think we need another rain.
Yeah.
Apparently the snow is not fresh up at Tahoe and they need fresh snow. All the students that go skiing keep me updated.
Right, yeah.
Now we're going to jump across the country to Bev, and you are so welcome at our swap. Nice
Am
to
I
have you.
unmuted? I don't know. Am I
Yeah.
unmuted? Okay.
You're unmuted.
My home is not my real home. My real home is my garden. That is where my life is. And what puts me into my garden is the first step in the spring to see all the beautiful lilies and roses and all the perennials coming up, to see the new baby deers that were born in my backyard woods that are finally coming out to the spring, to eat all my hostas and coming up. My graveyard of 1850, I always take a look to see what wildflowers have flown into the graveyard, which is directly behind my house. My garden is my home, and jumping into spring is what was it? Spring is in my step when the
Yeah.
first of the year I go out and see the birth of my new garden for the year.
Wow, that was very beautiful, Bev. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next, it's kind of interesting that I introduce the person and then they're supposed to introduce themselves. But this is Beth.
You're muted.
There we go. Hi, I'm Beth Wakely. I'm retired also teacher. Let's put spring in my step. Well, a lot of physical activity does, and two things I really love to do is when I go, we go once a year to Hawaii for an extended time, and I really love the canoe, the 6-man or the 12-man canoe, and don't get to do that as often with COVID, but I did enjoy that. It brought back all of that good feeling. And the second one is the garden also, because when I left, my yard was brown. And when I came back, it's just emerald green and all of these incredible calla lilies that plant themselves. I have no idea how they get all over my yard. And I'm so happy they're there. They just come up and smile. So, and storytelling. So
Yeah.
thanks for being here.
Thank you, Beth.
And I live in Sebastopol, which is close to
Sebastopol. Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder how many teachers there are among us. We have quite a few, I think. Genevieve.
A lot of things put spring in my step, but the smell of lavender and mint and thyme. But also when I walk with Chipper, because he's such a hoot, watching his little bottom shimmy and his tail wag, his nose explore. It's just delightful.
Our dogs are so precious, aren't they? And here is Ellie Shiva.
Says unmute. I thought
You're
I
good.
unmuted. Oh, okay. This is right in my, there's a sign in, there we go. Well, I live in Petaluma, and what really never fails, I don't care how bad I feel or tired or grumpy or whatever, if I listen to NPR radio a lot, and every once in a while they have this really cool dance music, like for a minute. And I'm boogieing. I don't care how I feel or anything. I start just dancing around my little place here. So that's what I like.
Is that in the morning, like during the morning show?
Any
or-
time of day or night that I have the radio on and that happens.
And NPR will do that? I don't think I've heard that.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm gonna.
Well, they're talking about somebody in Mexico, perhaps, and there's
Yeah.
a famous Mexican singer or just a little
Okay.
in between thing. It's like
Yeah.
a
I
minute
will
at the
listen
most.
for it, and I will think of you, Ellie Shiva.
Thank you. You could be my dance partner.
I can, yes. And next we have Vicky. Hi, Vicky.
Hey there. I think changing of seasons It always does it for me. And that's usually heralded first by scent. So, spring, you just really smell that wet earth. And when you're gardening, the smells of green and wet earth and all that. And then summer, people mowing their lawns and barbecues. And fall, of course, is that leaf mulch, the leaves that have fallen and turning into sort of mulch. And up here in Sebastopol, it's apples, a lot of apples. And then winter, wood smoke, and that just frost smell. And fall and winter, I think, are my favorites. And I think the other thing is dawn, because we get up early. We get up at 5:30 and it's dark. And I sit with my tea and watch the dawn come up. And every morning, it just blows my hair back. So.
A hair blowing dawn. That's great. Love that, Vicky. I love that.
I love it.
Vina.
You mute.
I live here in Pengrove and have the good fortune to be visited once a week or so by two of our grandkids, our two granddaughters, and they're 7 and 5. And when they come over, I like to do an art project with them. And what puts spring in my step is trying to keep up with the supplies that they need. It's in the house for the brushes. It's back out, it's in and out and in and out. And I find I'm pretty well worn out when they've gone because of that spring in my step.
And I'll bet you're a little worn out too.
I'm worn out. I'm the one that's worn out.
Oh, okay. They are too, I'll bet.
No. They just take it for granted.
Oh. I'll bet Grandma gets them going. And next we have Evelyn.
Okay, well, lots of things put spring in my step, but when Bev, the new storyteller, mentioned that she'd been the originator of the phrase STEM program, I got a real big spring in my step because my daughter is in a STEM program at UC Berkeley. And science can put, sometimes when I'm really depressed, then you hear about some amazing new scientific discovery.
Yeah.
It lifts your spirits, like, okay, well, we can, look to the future, maybe. Anyway, that's my spring for the step story.
Great. I love it.
Thank you, Evelyn. And next, let's hear from Sharon.
Oh, I muted. Let's see.
You're good.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm in Bremerton, Washington, and ain't no sunshine up here for a while, so it isn't spring, but that put spring in my step. But when I was talking to my little granddaughter today, she's in Missouri and they're having a snow day. And so she said, Grandma, I'll call you tomorrow because we need to celebrate. And I said, what are we celebrating? She said, it's National Freedom Day. And I said, does anybody know that? She said, no, it's just for you and me. We'll have National Freedom Day tomorrow. So, good. I'm looking forward to National Freedom Day.
I think we should all celebrate that. And next we have our other coordinator, Meg.
I agree. Freedom Day. Yes. So I'm Meg Brown. I live in Forestville, and I noticed the other day that I got up in the morning and I went in to wake Mom, and I could see the sun just streaming in her east facing window. And I thought, oh, yay. We're going to have light again in the morning. And I think that really starts the day out well, just as that's the spring and the step that you get when you have the time frame changing and the sun coming in. It's wonderful. So that's mine. You want to do Mom next?
Yes.
Okay. I'll get her on with her mute here. Whoops. There we go. And Mom, this is going to be you. Uh-oh. I'm going to put her on mine because
Oh,
hers
okay.
is
Yeah,
not
that's
being
easy.
helpful.
Sure.
So here we go. Here she is.
Oh, there I
Hi, Mary.
am. Hi. Well, I live here with Meg in Forest Trail, and there are two things that lead to a spring in my step. One of them is the fact that I have a polio survivor. And the other one is that I have a walker, and it is the walker that puts the spring in my step, which is getting slow because the polio is trying to slow it down.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you, Mary. Next, we have Gay. Hi, Gay.
Hi. The fact that things are coming out of being dormant, it puts a spring in my step, you know, to see the flowers that everybody's been talking about and the buds and the trees and just kind of everything seems to get alive. And
Yeah.
that makes me happy. I like
Me
that.
too. Thank you, Gay.
Uh-huh.
And Lori. Hi, Lori.
Hi, I'm in Santa Rosa, and like everybody else, the garden calls to me. And I think of this time of year in February as yellow month because there's the mustard fields beneath the oaks, and daffodils start to bloom, and acacia trees come out. And also, when you go for a walk in nature, there's California wildflowers that are yellow called sun cups and tidy tips. And they're just starting to come in. I saw some sun cups today at Taylor Mountain. So that puts a spring in my step, the yellow welcoming feeling of spring to come.
I wonder, I always thought that was mustard out there, but maybe it's these sun cups that I've been mistaking for mustard.
At Taylor Mountain?
Yeah.
I don't picture mustard unless it's way up high because I don't go to the top.
Okay.
But
Shoot,
if you
I've been
go-
going for romps in the mustard and it wasn't mustard. Thank you, Lori. All right, so we are ready for the second half. And our first teller of the second half, mustard is higher up, Genevieve has. Okay, what about Between the Vineyards? Is that mustard in the vineyards? Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I
Right.
have romp in that. Made the vineyard owner angry too. So our first teller of the second half, please welcome to our virtual Do Tell stage, Genevieve.
Can I try to record it on my side too? You'll just have to give me permission.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. Give me a second.
It hasn't prompted me for anything
Oh,
yet, but
this is a good experiment, as I call them, because
yeah,
other
an
people might want to.
experiment. Yeah. Let's see if I
If you can't, we can do it some other time. I don't want to delay.
the allow to record local files. Okay, I'm gonna just do that for you. Now try.
Okay, I think, okay, now. Okay, I think. The thing is, I never know if it's recording, whether it's a square or a pause or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll just
I
try it
think
if it's
you
working.
are.
I am, okay.
Yeah.
Some time ago, when my young adolescent self was overflowing with dreams and hormones. I used to spend summers in Guadalajara, Mexico, where I was born, pining away to the songs of the heartthrobs who were popular back then, especially the singer-songwriter Armando Manzanero. Oh, how I longed for a summer love, to find what was spoken of in the songs, the far side of the full moon's luminescence. But I'd invariably come back to the States with no sweetheart to leave behind. As the years passed, I'd often remember my favorite of Manzanero's songs. It was Contigo Aprendí. With you, I have learned. In fact, I'd ultimately, assiduously translate the lyrics into English, rhythm for rhythm, rhyme for rhyme. You'll recognize them inside finger quotes as we go along with this story. Little did I realize that what I had missed in my longing to know a world of dreams deserving of devotion was something that I would find closer to the autumn of my life in the man that I would ultimately come to marry. In time, I would come to feel that when I met him was the day of my rebirth. As we grew closer, I'd often sing Contigo Aprendí to him to express how being with him had transformed my life. That he hardly spoke a word of Spanish was of no concern. That he was blind, diabetic, and about to go into full kidney failure also mattered not at all. With him, I had found such different and profoundly deep emotions. He turned my smallest joys into a bit of heaven. We believed that ours was a transcendent happiness, even though we knew that it was not likely to last. But we were gifted with not 2, not 12, but 22 years together. So much more than we had expected. Still, it would ultimately come to the end that we had known we were living on the threshold of all along. Some days after we entered the hospital for the last of many times, feeling weary and dispirited, I took a moment to go downstairs to get a breath of fresh air. But I stopped when I heard the sounds of a piano playing. A volunteer was at the grand piano that the hospital provides for just that purpose, in case someone might be lifted up by the sound. As he finished a song, I saw him turn the binder of his music sheets, look, and finally select one. As he started, the strains were so familiar to me. Bling, 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 bling. It was the classic introduction to Contigo Aprendí. I sat down and imbibed the music and the memories, tears of joy and love and hope and longing and gratitude and grief streaming down my face. When he finished, I asked, "How is it that you came to play that particular song today?" "No particular reason." "Are you familiar with the song? You played it so well." "No, I've never played the song before." "Never in my life." "Do you know what it says?" "Not at all. I don't speak a word of Spanish." All I know is that I felt for some reason that I should play that piece right now, today. And with that, I knew that the lyrics of the song that I'd kept close to me all that time had come as true as what my heart had longed for those many, many years ago. With you, I have learned that there is nothing that can take me from your presence. My life's companion left this earth in quiescence that night. And very much as the song said, with him, I had learned the things that truly give life worth.
Ah,
Oh, Genevieve, that was beautiful.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Oh,
5:57, Genevieve, you were right on. Good girl.
yeah. Well, you did so much in just under 6 minutes.
I was rolling.
Yeah. That story has a very large scope to it.
It was a
Thank
new
you.
attempt to learn how to weave the lyrics in with the story itself.
Yeah. Contigo aprendí.
Aprendí. Mhm.
could you sing it for us?
Contigo aprendí. I don't remember the. Contigo aprendí. Aprendí que la semana tiene más de 7 días. Y contigo aprendí que el día en que anyway.
Beautiful.
I can share with you later the two versions,
Yeah.
Spanish and English.
Or maybe you could put a link to it in the chat.
I'll tell you what, I'll send maybe Meg or Katie or someone or you, I'll send you the translation, the
Yeah.
original, and I'll send you a link to a pianist doing a beautiful version of it.
That would be nice. Thank you. And Lori just added to the chat, touching, magical, heartfelt. Thank you, Genevieve. Lori, I think you meant that for everyone. You sent that to me, but it gave me the chance to share. No, that's okay. Anyway, thank you, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Now, Katie, do we have another teller signed up? Is that
Yes, we
it
do.
for-
We have you.
So yeah, I do, from time to time, if we ask for permission, we allow longer stories of up to 12 minutes. And I believe this story is just about 12 minutes. It's been a long time since I've told it, and I need to dust it off for an event. So I apologize to those of you who have heard this. Anyway, here I go.
Don't apologize.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I grew up here in the Bay Area, but every summer I went back to Missouri, where my mother was from, and I spent summers with my grandparents there. And my grandmother and grandfather would pick me up at the airport with my brother. And as we would drive, she would stop before we got to our house on a bridge over the Gasconade River. And our house was right on the river. And my grandmother would make us get out of the car and say hello to the river. And with tears of joy, my brother and I would say, hello, river. And then 3 months later, when we had to leave, she would stop and make us get out and say goodbye to the river. And, you know, I was 7, 8, 9, doing this. And with tears of sadness, we would say, goodbye, river, goodbye. We loved that river so much. And we just spent all day in it. Later in college, I was a chemistry major, and I realized I didn't like chemistry. And so junior year, I had a crisis, and I took a semester off, and I decided to go spend it in that empty house on the river that I love so much. I brought with me a big box of books. And one of those books was the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I'm not sure I understand what happens in that book. This person seems to become enlightened, but it's not the actual Buddha. It's someone whose life kind of parallels the Buddha. But part of Siddhartha's life in this book involves him settling on a river and learning to speak to the river and to listen to the river. And I think all of my life, I had known that my river could talk too. And so in this moment of crisis, I decided I would listen to the river. And the next day, I put my chair on the porch and I faced the river, which was only about 100 feet away, and I listened. And I heard nothing. The next day, the same thing. And after 3 days of doing this, I still hadn't heard anything. And so I decided I had to get closer. I had to be gliding along its glassy surface, listening for the faintest whispers. I had to be sleeping on its banks. And so I had a friend of the family drive me down to the Arkansas-Missouri border, where this river first bubbles up out of the ground. I figured I would canoe the entire stretch from the source to my house. Now, the guy driving me down there, his name was Rich. He lived on the river, and he was always telling stories about the river. You heard of a catfish? He asked me. And I said, yep. Well, did you ever hear of a dogfish? And I said, no. And then he proceeded on telling me a story about a fish he caught, and he trained it so that it would go, he would throw his lure out and the fish would bring it back to him. And then he'd throw it out. Anyway, he was full of stories like that. Rich, I asked, and he said, what? Do you think the river can talk? And he gave me a look. And he said, sure do. And he added a wink to that look. And I said, how do you know when it's talking to you, Rich? And he said, Brandon, you just know. What I hadn't taken into account was how small this river was going to be at the very source of it. Gliding along its glassy surface, listening for the, I had to drag my canoe through what was essentially just wet gravel down near Arkansas. It was a very small river. And the worst thing, late in the day, as I was trudging from puddle to puddle in the heat of the sun, I think my mind started playing tricks on me. I started hearing footsteps behind me. Crunch, crunch, splash, and I'd stop and I'd hear crunch, splash. And I'd turn around, and every time I turned around, there was nobody. One time I was so sure I heard someone trudging in the water behind me that I threw down the rope and I began to wander back upstream, calling, hello, is somebody there? I hear you. There was nobody. That first night, I was exhausted. I had dragged the canoe for about 17 miles. The only good thing was that a few creeks had come in. So I was actually able to float for the last half a mile or so. I made a little fire. I roasted some potatoes. And for the first time that day, I stared out at the little creek that was in front of me, that was my river, and I listened. What was this river going to say to me? What would it sound like? Crunch, splash, crunch. This time it was not my imagination. Something big was walking down the river. And sure enough, in the dim light of my fire, an enormous shadow loomed. It was a man with the biggest hat I have ever seen. The brim was so big that it hid his entire face, all except for his red lips, which were stretched right across his chin, just like a river snake sunning itself on a rock. The name's Wino, he said, and he didn't say much else. All I gathered was he was some kind of drinking man, and he came out into the woods to dry out. Oh, but me, nervous, I began to babble on and on about the book Siddhartha and how I'd come to the river to listen to it because Siddhartha listened to it and became enlightened, and I thought the river could talk. Without any warning, Wino suddenly stood up and walked out of my campsite and disappeared back out into the darkness. Crunch, splash, crunch. I began to think maybe I sounded a little strange. Maybe I had driven Wino away with all this talk about listening to the river. And I resolved the next morning, if he came floating past my campsite, I'd invite him in for a cup of coffee and explain myself a little better. That was when I heard another sound. Snap, crunch. Something big was moving on the hillside behind me. I walked over to the edge of my campground and called up the hillside. Wino, is that you? Are you coming back? Good, because I think I better explain myself better. That was when I heard a sound. And the only way I know how to describe this sound, it's like a wolf howling through a garden hose. Why, I backed up so close to my fire, 1 foot was in the fire. And somehow I had managed to pick up my axe. And I waited for whatever it was to appear. And sure enough, right at the edge of the woods on the side of that gravel bar, 2 red eyes appeared. And they began to bounce up and down as whatever it was came charging right at me. I brought the axe down right on top of the thing, and it skidded through the gravel. And in the firelight, I saw hooves. It was a very angry, very small wild hog. I don't know what I had done to make this thing so angry, but it circled around and came at me, and I hit it again with the axe and again. And I realized one of us was going to die that night. And so I started throwing things into my canoe, and with half of my stuff still on the gravel bar, I shoved off into the darkness. And I'll be danged if that little hog, it didn't launch itself and come snorkeling right after me. I paddled and hit every log and every branch. And every time I stopped and thought I had gone far enough, I'd hear it again. It was still coming after me down the river. At a certain point, very late at night or early in the morning, I must have dozed off, and my canoe wedged between a log and the bank. Something woke me up, and I bolted upright out of the bottom of the canoe. My face had been on a bolt on the bottom, and it stung in the morning mist. I heard the knock of an oar, and gliding effortlessly in the main channel, coming right out of the mist, was none other than Wino. Wino, I shouted, and this leaf that was on my forehead fell off. And I called, Wino, last night I thought you came back into my camp, but it wasn't you, it was a hog. Wino didn't say anything. He just gave me that same look with that enigmatic smile, his red lips stretched across his chin just like a river snake sunning itself on a rock. And silently, he disappeared into the mist. Well, I pulled over to the side to make myself a cup of coffee. And I realized I had done nothing to assure Wino that I wasn't as crazy as a Mad Hatter. And so when I got back in my canoe, I started to paddle as fast as I could to try to catch up to him, to explain myself a little better. And around every bend, nothing. I never saw him. And by late afternoon, I was done. I pulled over to a farmhouse, used their phone and called up Rich, and he drove down and picked me up. Of course, he asked, well, Brandon, did you hear the voice of the river? Oh, Rich, I moaned. I spent the entire night getting chased down the river by a hog. And he laughed and he laughed. It was the first time I'd told him a story about the river. And then he informed me that that stretch of river I was on was supposed to be haunted. There had been a murderer, and he had hidden the bodies in these holes in the Dolomite bluffs along there. And I was just about to tell him about Wino when I stopped. We were driving across a bridge, and beneath that bridge, twinkling in the late afternoon light, was the river. And in that moment, in that silence, between two stories told by people who know and love that river, I think I heard it. And I think Rich was hearing it too, because he looked over at me and he gave me that wink. It didn't use words. It was more like a feeling, gentle but strong, almost like pure encouragement. The voice of the river. Well, that fall, I went back to school and I changed majors. I became an English major. I studied literature. And if I hadn't spent that night on the river, I don't think I'd be sitting right here in front of you telling a story. Thank you. Meg, did you time that?
I have to admit there was a glitch in the timer thingy,
Oh, that's
so
all.
you get a free pass too,
Oh,
Brandon.
good.
Actually, Brandon, I did. I timed it.
Oh, good.
It was 14 minutes, 26 seconds.
Uh-oh, I broke
Yay.
the rules.
It's fine.
Yeah, no
Like,
problem. No
story.
problem with that.
Thank you.
Where are you going to be telling this story? It's excellent. Absolutely. You had me all the ways. 14 minutes went by fast.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. There's a series with Assist Artists Standing Strong Together.
Yes.
It's a
yeah.
February series. It's virtual. And they have 4 tellers at every meeting. I'm one of the 4. And each time it meets, a different teller is featured. And then the tellers talk about crafting stories and how they built those stories.
Does Sheila Arnold run that?
Yes, she does.
I'm going to be the one in March. One of the ones in March she's having.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I've done it twice before for her also.
Oh, that's great. Is that Bev?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
Beverly.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, Sheila runs all of those Artists Standing Strong Together programs, and they're so good.
I was their backup in case for February if somebody pulled out.
Oh,
Somebody pulled
great.
out, but she's putting me in March.
So next week is Megan Wells.
Mhm.
She's the featured teller. She's been at some pretty big events, I think. I remember one for National Storytelling Network on Halloween. She was one of the Halloween tellers. I think it's Spooky October or something that NSN has done.
Mhm.
Anyway,
That was wonderful. You really just had me all the ways. It was like I was sitting at the edge of my seat saying, what is going to happen to him?
yeah.
And I was wondering how you became an English teacher too.
Yeah, well, that's part of how. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our swap. Am I right, Katie and Meg? Is that it
Yes.
for the program this evening? And I always like it when Katie tells last because her stories kind of are such a wonderful segue into the dream world, I think. But thank you for listening to my story. And I think I should bring our tellers up briefly. Thanks to Genevieve for Contigo Aprende. And Bev, welcome to our swap. It was so great to hear your story about Charlie Tuna. And oh, Lori, our walking Valentine. Thank you for sharing that. You always touch our hearts. And let's see, Vicky and Vicky. There you are. Hi, Vicky. And thank you for your corporate love letter, man. He touched our hearts too. You never know what's on the other side. And of course, Evelyn. I'm looking for Evelyn. Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn, for your story about the Japanese American internment. I always like to add that word American because they were Americans and Japanese ancestry. And of course, we've got Sharon. And Sharon, I'm going to really imagine a reverse sermon. I'm teaching a comparative religions class. I'm going to give that as an assignment. Write a reverse sermon tomorrow. So thank you for that.
I
And
share a very small anecdote about interned persons and interned Americans. The man who was my pediatric oncologist was named Dr. Suto, and he was in medical school when his family was interned. So he had to stop his studies and later resumed them. Years later, he would join the Atomic Energy Commission to go to Japan and study the effects of our bombing on the people over the years. As a result, whereas only radiation therapies had been used here against cancer, he learned about chemotherapy, brought it back to the hospital where I was treated. And I was treated with a non-FDA approved experimental drug that he brought back.
wow.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to just thank our coordinators, Meg and Katie, for keeping this group running and updating us all and reminding us when our next Tuesday meeting is. And it will be March the next time we see each other. I have to say the 4 weeks goes by pretty fast. It's really something, isn't it? And before we know it, we'll be together again. And it's something that I always look forward to.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Good
Brandon.
night. Thank you.
just do such a wonderful job
Oh,
all together and making it such a great evening.
so honored.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. See you in
Love to
March.
everybody.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hmm.